So get ready because today we're going on a deep dive, and it's going to be a unique one. We're going to be tackling philosophy.
Ooh, fun.
But through the lens of jokes.
I love it.
So we're going to see if laughter truly is the best medicine for understanding some of life's big questions.
I'm ready.
And we are not just, making this up.
Yeah.
We'll be drawing our insights from Plato and a Platypus Walk into a Bar, understanding philosophy through jokes, a book by Thomas Cathcart and Daniel Klein.
That's right.
And these authors take a really fun approach using humor to break down these complex philosophical ideas. And I'm really excited to see what they've come up with.
Me too.
First of all, the book's dedication immediately caught my eye.
Yeah.
It's dedicated to Groucho Marx.
It is. And it even includes one of his most famous quotes.
Oh, really?
These are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others.
That's great.
I think that sets the tone perfectly, right? This kind of playful, flexible approach to serious topics that both humor and philosophy can embrace.
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder, can you really get to the heart of these philosophical questions through something as lighthearted as a joke?
Well, that's exactly what the author set out to do with this concept they call philo-gagging. So basically, it's using jokes to make philosophical points.
Okay.
And they jump right in with a great example. A joke about a guy named Morty who comes home and finds his wife in bed with his best friend Lou.
Oh, juicy.
Just as Morty is about to react,
Oh.
Lou jumps out of bed and says, "Before you say anything, old pal, what are you going to believe, me or your eyes?"
Wow. So it's not just your typical infidelity joke. It's getting at something deeper here.
Absolutely. It makes you think about epistemology, the study of knowledge.
Yeah.
Like, how do we know it's true? Can we trust our senses? Or do we need something more like reason to guide us?
That's fascinating. I love how a simple joke can open up such profound questions.
Yeah.
So where do we go from there? What other philosophical territory are we going to be covering?
Well, they move on to metaphysics, the big questions about existence and reality.
Metaphysics. Now that sounds intimidating.
It might sound heavy, but they use humor to make it surprisingly accessible. And they focus on two key branches of metaphysics: essentialism and rationalism.
Okay, let's break those down.
All right.
Essentialism.
So think about it this way. What makes something what it is? The book uses a joke about a green herring to explain this.
Okay.
So this man keeps describing this green herring that hangs on the wall and whistles, and his friend keeps pointing out that herrings aren't green, don't hang on walls, and definitely don't whistle.
Yeah, I can see where this is going.
It's about how we define things, right?
Yeah.
The joke plays with our assumptions about what makes a herring a herring. It highlights the difference between essential properties, like the things a herring must have to be a herring, and accidental properties, the things that might be true, but don't change its fundamental herringness.
That's a really clever way to explain it.
Right.
Now, what about rationalism? What's the joke that illuminates that concept?
The book focuses on the philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz and his argument that this is the best of all possible worlds. This idea is often misconstrued as naive optimism, like everything is perfect and rosy.
I can see how that would be an easy target for jokes.
Oh, for sure. And the authors include some great ones, like the joke comparing an optimist and a pessimist. An optimist thinks that this is the best of all possible worlds. A pessimist fears that this is so.
Oh, I like that one. It's getting at something much more nuanced than just blind faith, right?
Exactly. What Leibniz was really saying is that given all the possibilities, God, being all-powerful and good, would have chosen the best one. It's not about saying there's no bad stuff. It's about the idea that this world, even with its flaws, is the most logically sound option.
That makes a lot more sense. So it seems like jokes can actually help us understand philosophical ideas in a deeper way.
It's true.
What else are we going to dive into?
Well, next up is logic. The rules of reason that help us make sense of the world and avoid faulty thinking.
I'm all for that.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, what kind of jokes do they use to explain logic?
So when we think of logic, the image of Sherlock Holmes often comes to mind, right? That master of deduction, piecing together clues with his sharp intellect.
Oh yeah, Sherlock Holmes, he's like the poster child for logical thinking.
Right.
But isn't there more to logic than just deduction?
That's right. The book actually points out that Holmes, despite his fame for deduction, often relied more on inductive reasoning.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What is the difference between these two types of logic?
Well, inductive reasoning is about drawing general conclusions based on specific observations. Kind of like building a theory from the ground up, like scientists do when they observe patterns in nature.
So making educated guesses based on the evidence you have.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, they share a hilarious anecdote about Holmes and Watson on a camping trip. So picture this. They're sleeping under the stars, and in the middle of the night, Holmes wakes Watson up and asks, "Watson, look up at the sky and tell me what you see."
I bet Watson starts waxing poetic about the constellations
Of course.
and the vastness of the universe.
You guessed it, but Holmes cuts him off and says, "Watson, you idiot. Someone has stolen our tent."
Oh no, that's a classic Homesian twist.
It perfectly demonstrates how inductive reasoning, while powerful, can lead you astray if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Watson was so focused on the grand scheme of things that he missed the most obvious clue, the missing tent.
That's a good reminder to always check your surroundings before you start philosophizing.
Right. Now, deductive logic works in the opposite direction.
Okay.
You start with general principles and apply them to specific situations.
So if inductive reasoning is about building up a theory,
Yeah.
deductive reasoning is about applying an existing theory.
Exactly. And to explain this, they use a joke that's a little unconventional, but it definitely makes you think. It involves a cowboy in a bar who overhears a woman declaring that she's a lesbian, and she explains how everything she sees and does makes her think about women.
Okay, I'm already curious to see where this is going.
Later, someone asks the cowboy if he's a real cowboy, and he replies, "I always thought I was, but I just found out I'm a lesbian."
Wait, what? That's hilarious.
The joke cleverly plays with the structure of a deductive argument. The cowboy mistakenly applies the woman's logic to himself, even though the premise that everything he sees makes him think about women clearly doesn't apply to him.
So even if you follow the rules of logic perfectly, you can still end up with a ridiculous conclusion if you start with the wrong assumptions.
Precisely. And the book also highlights some common pitfalls of logical thinking, like the Monte Carlo fallacy.
I've heard of that one. Isn't that the gambler's fallacy? Like thinking that if a coin lands on heads 5 times in a row, it's more likely to land on tails next time?
You got it. That mistaken belief that past events can influence the probabilities of future events, even when those events are independent of each other.
So basically the odds reset with each new flip of the coin.
Exactly, and to illustrate this, they use a rather dark but funny example. They suggest that for safety reasons, you should always bring a bomb with you when you fly.
Hold on, a bomb? That doesn't sound very safe at all.
Of course not. But the joke lies in the absurd logic. The odds of 2 people on the same plane having a bomb are astronomically low. It's a satirical way of highlighting how the Monte Carlo fallacy can lead us to ridiculous conclusions.
Okay, that's definitely a memorable way to make the point.
Right.
So we've explored how we can use logic to reach conclusions.
Yeah.
But what about the bigger question of how we even know anything at all?
You're talking about epistemology, the study of knowledge itself.
Okay.
And that's where we'll head next in our deep dive.
Epistemology. Now, that's a word that can really make your head spin, but it's a fascinating question, isn't it? How do we know what we know?
It really is one of those core questions in philosophy, and Plato in A Platypus Walk into a Bar tackles it head-on, exploring different theories about how we acquire knowledge.
So let's dive into some of those theories. Where do we begin?
Well, they start with empiricism, the idea that knowledge comes primarily from our senses, from what we experience in the world.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, we see, we hear, we touch. These are the building blocks of our understanding.
Exactly. And they use a great joke to illustrate how our reliance on observation can sometimes lead to faulty conclusions. And it involves a Sardar, who's kind of like this naive but lovable character in Indian culture, and he's training to be a detective.
I love a good Sardar joke.
All right, so a policeman shows 3 Sardars a picture of a suspect and asks how they would recognize him. The first 2 Sardars focus on obvious physical traits, but the third Sardar says the suspect wears contact lenses.
Contact lenses, that's a pretty specific detail.
It is, and the policeman is impressed. Like, he doesn't even know if that's true. He checks the suspect's file, and sure enough, he does wear contacts.
Wow.
So he asks the Sardar, "How did you know that?" And the Sardar replies, "That's easy. He can't wear regular glasses because he only has one eye and one ear."
Oh my gosh, that's classic.
Yeah.
You know, he got so fixated on this one tiny detail that he completely missed the bigger picture.
Exactly. It's a humorous way to show how our senses, while generally reliable, can sometimes mislead us if we're not paying attention to the whole context.
It's a good reminder to always zoom out and look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
Now, what about other epistemological theories? What comes after empiricism?
Well, the book then delves into Kant's transcendental idealism. A mouthful, I know, but a really important concept.
Okay, brace yourselves. Transcendental idealism. What's the joke-friendly version of that?
So Kant argued that we can only know the world as it appears to us, not as it truly is in itself. He called this unknowable essence the Ding in sich, the thing in itself.
So it's like there's this veil between us and reality, and we can only see the shadows, not the true forms.
That's a great analogy, and the book uses a really simple but effective joke to illustrate this. An invisible man goes to the doctor, and the receptionist tells the doctor, "There's an invisible man in the waiting room." And the doctor replies, "Tell him I can't see him."
You know, it's funny because it highlights the absurdity of our limitations.
Yeah.
Like if we can only know things through our senses, then something invisible is literally beyond our grasp.
Exactly. It's a lighthearted way to make a really profound point about the limits of human perception.
Okay, so we've got empiricism, where knowledge is based on experience, and Kant's idealism, where we're limited by our perception. What other theories do they cover?
Well, next they explore pragmatism, which is all about practicality and usefulness. Pragmatists believe that truth is what works, like a belief is true if it helps us navigate the world effectively.
So less about finding this, absolute truth and more about finding what's helpful in our everyday lives.
Precisely. And they use a joke about a wife describing her husband to highlight this. So the police ask her for a description that corresponds to reality, and she says, "Correspondence, schmorrespondence. Truth cannot be determined solely by epistemological criteria, because the adequacy of those criteria cannot be determined apart from the goals sought and values held."
Wow, that's a pretty dense response for a police report.
Yeah.
But I think I get what she's saying. She's rejecting the idea that there's just one objective truth.
Yeah.
So for her, truth is subjective, and it depends what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. It's a funny way to show how pragmatism focuses on the practical consequences of our beliefs, rather than getting bogged down in these abstract debates about, what truth really is.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the nature of reality to the rules of logic to the different ways we acquire knowledge. And it's amazing how jokes can illuminate these, complex philosophical ideas.
It really is. And the book doesn't stop there. It goes on to explore ethics, philosophy of religion, even the meaning of life. But I think we'll leave that for you to discover on your own.
That's a great idea. We've given our listeners a taste of how humor can be a powerful tool for understanding philosophy. And now it's their turn to continue the exploration.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe you'll even start seeing philosophical questions hiding in your everyday jokes.
That's a great takeaway. So to all our listeners out there, the next time you hear a good joke, don't just laugh it off. Take a moment to ponder what it might be saying about the world, about ourselves, about the big questions that have puzzled philosophers for centuries.
And if a joke can shed light on philosophy, can philosophy also help us understand what makes a joke funny? That's a question worth pondering as you continue your own philosophical journey, one joke at a time.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of philosophy through jokes. We hope you had as much fun as we did.